Hello, my name is Jeremy DeLong. This project studies Atlassian's retirement of their server product tier and their planned retirement of their data center tier. I treat this as a systems decision that connects data, risk, and choices. Atlassian historically offered three deployment options for their products, specifically around Jira and Confluence. The server tier was perpetual and self-hosted. That ended in February of 2024. The data center tier is the self-managed and self-hosted subscription model used by large enterprises. That's planned to end in March of 2029. The cloud tier is the fully managed SaaS model hosted by Atlassian. Atlassian wants one main platform. The logic of this is pretty straightforward. One primary platform, fewer release trains, a smaller testing matrix, and lower support and operational overhead. This shift changes who carries cost and risk for customers because these tools sit at the center of essential business workflows. Cloud-ready teams gain faster upgrades and simpler security work. High compliance or deeply integrated teams face migration cost, less control, and more vendor lock-in. The end-of-life plan shifts risk from customer-run systems to Atlassian Cloud. It can force simplification of bespoke automations and highly customized workflows that can pose significant risk and cost to existing customers currently leveraging the data center tier. For this project, I'm trying to answer one question. The server tier reached end of life. Data center is planned to end in 2029. But should Atlassian continue down that path and commit to cloud only, or should it continue some level of a hybrid approach to maintain data center for a longer period based on their results from their end of life of the server tier? I use three perspectives when looking at this: timeline and data, which would include key dates, stock moves, and revenue mix; customer and community sentiment, essentially who benefits and who pays; decision models, decision regions, effective cost and value of information that would potentially influence the choice that Atlassian faces and make the trade-offs explicit. I use four source types: Atlassian announcements and end-of-life pages, earnings and deployment mix disclosures, team versus NASDAQ windows, and community and partner posts. I have created a timeline webpage that puts milestones related to Atlassian's decision to end the server tier and subsequently also announce the end of the data center tier in chronological order. This timeline also tracks the stock price in comparison to the NASDAQ as a whole, and also gives extra information related to Atlassian beyond their official notices. Important dates to note are the following. In October of 2020, Atlassian announced the server end of life. Between October of 2020 and February of 2021, the Forgotten Middle letter appeared as a complaint against Atlassian's plan to end the server tier. In February of 2021, new server license sales were ended. In February of 2022, upgrades and downgrades were ended as well. February 2023, new marketplace apps were not allowed to be added. In February of 2024, the server support officially ended. September of 2025, Atlassian announced Ascend, a cloud-first strategy paired with the planned data center end of life that is set for 2029. To add a market signal, I computed simple T-2 to T+2 windows around key events, looking at Atlassian's excess return by comparing Atlassian's stock performance to that of NASDAQ as a whole. Atlassian stock symbol is TEAM, so I compared TEAM versus the NASDAQ index. At the October 2020 announcement, TEAM strongly outperformed NASDAQ, suggesting the market liked the clarity of a cloud-first simplification. Later on, as the cutoffs become real, the reaction becomes more cautious. In February of 2022, TEAM underperformed relative to NASDAQ, even though the company's cloud story remains strong, consistent with the migration risk premium that the market was attaching to it. At the final server tier end of life in February 2024, Team was down while NASDAQ was up, about a 6 percentage point negative excess return. And at the September 2025 Ascend and Data Center end of life announcement, excess return was modestly positive. One interpretation is that the marginal news value of each additional restriction declines over time, and later milestones can even register as incremental concern once cloud dominance is already assured. When looking at revenue mix in cloud versus self-managed, these numbers show the shift. Q3 of fiscal year 2022, cloud was near $400 million and near 54% of revenue. In quarter 3 of fiscal year 2024, cloud was near $700 million and near 59% of revenue. Server fell below $30 million and data center more than doubled. In the first quarter of 2026, cloud is estimated to be near $1 billion and near 70% of the revenue. Data center has dropped to near 26%. So the expectation is by the time data center end of life is announced, Atlassian is already cloud dominant economically, and the risk has been accepted into the market. The risk question essentially shifts. It becomes about the last self-managed customers on data center, who may also be the largest enterprises dependent on Atlassian Data Center to conduct business. I group impact into 3 archetypes. Cloud-ready teams, smaller orgs with simpler workflows and automations. Migration to them feels very manageable and actually possibly beneficial because it offloads the responsibility of server upkeep to Atlassian itself. High compliance and heavily integrated teams with highly regulated work, heavily customized workflows, and heavily customized automations feel that migration feels forced. They worry about vendor lock-in. They worry about changing directions again if Atlassian decides to introduce another change. These are the customers most likely to have issues with the data center end of life. Partners and consultants is a third archetype. They publish migration playbooks, risk warnings. They're trying to emphasize timing, capacity. They're trying to avoid cutoff cliffs. But common themes repeat. Cloud security and feature cadence increases will be a help, but loss of self-managed choices and dependency on Atlassian for their cloud offerings is criticized, and there is a credible churn pressure. The evidence presented so far is historical and describes what has happened. The models are going to ask when cloud only is a rational choice. They're going to attempt to answer question 1, which is when does cloud only beat a hybrid approach or a complete reversal? Question 2, how does cost to serve and failure probability change the effective cost? Question 3, what is better information worth before committing to the final data center tier cutoff? I've built a demo to illustrate these concepts. When viewing the demo, you can see the top chart shows team and NASDAQ stock prices and the excess returns. It also includes a short forward section overlaid to try to predict what will happen based on the changes we make to the models. The middle strip lists these timeline events. You can click highlights the stock window, loads parameter presets into the models as well. On the right are the 3 model panels, decision regions, effective cost, and value of information. The bottom panel on the left shows the results of the selections made for each model and the values that would come out of them. The goal of this isn't to predict the stock value. The goal is to connect the models to real decisions and make those assumptions visible. The first model we're going to look at is the decision regions model. The expected utility is linear in a belief P, and the best strategy changes when the lines cross. I define 3 strategies. Cloud only is the cloud only future. Retire the data center tier after having already retired the server tier. Hybrid keeps a limited data center style tier while continuing to migrate customers to the cloud tier. Reversal is a stronger return to self-managed data center as an option. This tier would essentially mean that Atlassian keeps the data center tier in perpetuity, licenses could be renewed for an indefinite period, the add-on marketplace would continue to function with new apps being able to be added, and the support for the data center software does not end. For each strategy, I represent expected utility as a line. EUD equals A plus B times P. Here, P is the belief that the cloud-dominant world works out well. The intercept A is the value if cloud fails. The slope B is the upside captured if cloud succeeds. The key point is that different belief states and payoff structures carve the decision space into regions where cloud only dominates or where hybrid or reversal becomes a rational choice. The second model is effective cost. This model adds risk to cost. This is the same structure from the satellite build problem, where expected loss is P failure times mission value. Cost to serve, the long-run NPV cost of engineering, support, infrastructure, and compliance. P failure, the probability of strategic failure, things like enterprise churn, regulatory blocks, major reliability incidents, or a forced reversal. And mission value, the value of Atlassian's franchise if things go well. Effective cost is cost to serve plus P failure times mission value. Cloud only can be cheaper to run operationally, but if it increases strategic failure probability, the effective cost can be higher. Hybrid is more expensive operationally, but can reduce P failure by hedging constrained segments like the largest data center clients who might have a problem moving to the cloud. Reversal is typically the most expensive in that we've already now lost all of the time and investment of everything that Atlassian has already done, and may only modestly improve P failure beyond the hybrid. Value of information model. This uses the Oracle clairvoyance framing. How much is worth to reduce uncertainty when the downside case is expensive? We compare expected utility without an oracle versus with an oracle that reveals whether the cloud world is good or bad, net of an oracle fee. The value of information is high when the downside in the bad world is large and information meaningfully changes the best decision. This helps interpret the staged data center timeline. A long runway can be seen as paying for partial information time to observe migrations, churn, regulatory signals, and any other bumps along the road before making the final cutoff. Now let's put the historical evidence and the models together. From the historical data and sentiment, the cloud-first pivot works. Cloud becomes dominant, server disappears. But as server actually hits end of life, we see more concern from constrained segments and negative excess returns around the final cutoff. The models reflect the same tension. Under optimistic belief and low failure risk, cloud only dominates. But when we increase churn risk, regulatory risk, lock-in concerns, etc., hybrid can win on effective cost, even if it's more expensive on paper, because it reduces the probability of a very expensive strategic failure. This decision is driven less by average cloud upsides and more by the expected P failure time mission value, plus the value of learning before locking in. Overall, my recommendation for Atlassian is a qualified yes to a cloud-first transition, but paired with a more robust hybrid bridge period for the most constrained customers through and potentially beyond 2029. Investing in portability and clearer exit paths, use telemetry to refine beliefs about churn and failure probabilities. Again, the large downside for Atlassian is if this cloud-only migration fails for their largest clients. Data center customers should treat deployment and licensing as systems, meaning engineering and contract design choices, not just pricing. Considering options that can be built and tailored to their needs, possibly switching to a multi-vendor architecture to lower their dependability on Atlassian. Explicit export migration paths need to be created to help facilitate the move into cloud, and trying to anticipate any future vendor strategy shifts as well. Thank you very much.